top news: two simultaneous operations by the Ukrainian army. Ukrainian forces lodged the Crimea in Operation Ukrainian Army struck and major blow to Russian forces and Crimea and Mary. With both air and naval operations, Russia, citizens living in the region started to leave crime. Russian leader Vladimir Putin van Berser, as the occupying Russian forces started to lose the territories they occupied in Ukrainian territory, one after the other. Putin was aware that the Russian army has lost a lot of power, recently is trying to calm the Russian people, and Kremlin officials stating that the Russian army still has one other 50,000 soldiers who have not yet been sent to Ukrainian T. Putin said that Ukraine has no chance against the Russian army. Putin's threatening speech has once again mobilized the U.S. and its Western allies, thinking that Putin will send more troops to Ukraine. The allied countries of Ukraine have increased their support for the UK-Ukraine army. While the whole world was expecting the Russian army to launch a new attack on Ukrainian territory, this operation carried out. Why? The Ukrainian army managed to surprise every Ukrainian state leader. Vladimir Zelensky delivered a speech in the Ukrainian parliament. After his speech, Ukrainian leader Zelensky received a standing ovation from the members of the parliament. Zelensky stated that a step must now be taken for Crimea, which has long been under the control of Russia, that the Ukrainian army will organize a large-scale operation to rescue Ukrainian citizens in Crimea. A week after Zelensky's words, the Ukrainian army launched a big operation for Crimea. Ukrainian forces who wanted to liberate the occupied Crimean Peninsula and Mary region from the Russian occupation gave the Occupy aggression forces a very difficult time with both air, land operations. Russian citizens who started to feel uneasy about the explosions in Crimea started to think that Russian leader Vladimir Putin is no longer able to ensure the security of Russia's borders. As a result of the Ukrainian army's attacks, more than 100,000 Russian citizens started to leave Crimea for the first time in a long time. The Ukrainian army organized an air operation in the Mariupol. Ukrainian fighter jets and unmanned warplanes set out to destroy Russian corridors in Mariupol. The Ukrainian army took action with Su-27 fighter jets to neutralize the largest HAT corridors of Russian forces in Mariupol. The Ukrainian forces, which organized Ryriko's flights in Mariupol by flying at high altitude Smith-by unmanned fighter jets, launched the operation after dissecting the location of the Russian headquarters, taking action with 4 unaugmented warplanes. The Ukrainian army started to target the Russian ACT quarters. Russian soldiers who noticed the unmanned warplanes managed to shoot down 2 of the Ukrainian unmanned warplanes with portable anti-aircraft missile systems. The remaining 2 unaugmented warplanes continued the operation and started to pull up the AT corridors building of the Russian forces. The drones returned after completing their missile launch. While the Russian soldiers in the corridors thought that the Ukrainian army's air attack was over, a Ukrainian Su-27 fighter jet flew over the Russian corridors and exploded the Russian ammunition depot inside the quarters. As the missile hit the ammunition depot, the intensity of the explosion increased much more in this operation organized by the UKI army. More than 60 Russian soldiers were killed, and many Russian ammunition were. Although Russian forces felt the operation was over, this was not the case. The Ukrainian army simultaneously launched a large-scale operation in Crimea. The occupying Russian forces suffered their biggest blow here. This operation against the Crimean Peninsula was organized by Ukrainian Navy ships. The Ukrainian Navy ships that appeared of the Black Sea organized a major operation against the Russian Navy ships of fire and crime. The Russian Navy ships, which were tasked with protecting the Kerch Bridge, were anchored off the coast of the Philadelphia region. The Navy ships that Turkey had given to Ukraine had been kept on Turkey's Black Sea coast for a long time. However, Russia did not know about these Navy ships. The Ukrainian army, led by the Navy ship named Helpless, Mazak, moved towards the Crimea offshore with for war. The main aim of the Ukrainian Navy was to destroy the air defense systems on the Kerch Bridge. But when they solved the Russian Navy ships, a big clash took place. When the Ukrainian Navy ships solved the Russian Navy ships, they started artillery fire. The anchored Russian ships were exposed to artillery fire before they realized what was happening. The Ukrainian crew had already destroyed one of the 2 Russian naval ships with a direct. The Russian crew threw themselves into the water as the ship exploded. The other Russian war began firing back at the Ukrainian Navy ships surrounded by Ukrainian ships. The Russian war had nothing left to do. The second Navy ship was also successfully destroyed by Ukrainian artillery fire after destroying the Navy ships of the coast of. The Ukrainian army targeted the air defense systems in the city of Fascia, which are tasked with protecting the Russian Navy ships. Ukrainian Navy ships started bombarding Russian headquarters and air defense systems on the coast. The Ukrainian Navy, which managed to neutralize the RD-FES systems in a short time, successfully completed the mission and returned to the Black Sea. However, this operation carried out by the Ukrainian army caused a big trouble for Putin. The explosions and fires that have recently started to increase with the Russia's borders were already making Russian citizens very uneasy. On top of that, the realization of an attack crime, a scared Russian citizens even more Vladimir Putin is no longer able to ensure Russia's border security. Realizing the situation, Russian citizens began to leave Crimea and move to safer. More than 100,000 Russian citizens left Crimea and fled to safer cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg. Putin was not at all pleased with this situation. For years, Putin has been trying to suppress the number of minority citizens by satellite Russian citizens on the Crimea Peninsula. This is one of Putin's assimilation policies, and he has been practicing it. Since there are many minority citizens in autonomous regions, such as Crimea and Stan, Putin is very worried about an internal unrest here. In order to prevent the situation, Putin offers money and land as an incentive for Russia's citizens to settle in Crimea. Intel's clashes are also ongoing in the city of Pout. One of the regionals for the hot conflict continues in Ukrainian T. The occupying Russian forces want to capture the city of BMO. After capturing the city of Sor, however, it is still not clear why Bakhmut is so important for Russia. Preen, the founder of the Wagner mercenary company, known as Vladimir Putin's close friend, occupied Sor for his own interests. Preen, who wanted to control the underground resources in Sor, attacked the city of Sor with a large number of vector soldiers and managed to repel Ukrainian forces. From there, the city of BMO is allegedly wanted by Yevgeny Prigozhin. It is said that if Russian leader Vladimir Putin, BMO as Salar are captured by Wagner soldiers, the underground resources and management of the cities will be given to Prigozhin. The Russian army continues to send back their soldiers to the region where it is insufficient on Ukrainian territory. Prigozhin continues to collect prisoners from Russian prisons as sent up to Ukrainian territory in order to occupy Ukrainian territory more easily. Next news: Petersburg and Moscow being targeted. Russian forces are launching attacks at various points along the front line in eastern Ukraine for territorial gain. However, the Ukrainian forces continue their successful defensive operations, preventing the Russian forces from reaching there. The Kremlin government has deployed almost all the equipment of the Russian army on Ukrainian soil in order to succeed in the Ukraine invasion plan, which Vladimir Putin initiated in line with his personal ambitions. This situation created a great lack of defense throughout Russia. The lack of defense caused security vulnerabilities in important cities of Russia. The vulnerabilities were the opportunity for the Ukrainian forces to have a significant advantage in the war. On many fronts on Ukrainian territory, Ukrainian forces are routing the Russians with heavy loss. However, Russian forces are forcibly recruiting Russian citizens and deploying them on Ukrainian territory. Ukrainian forces have increased the frequency of cross-border attacks in recent days to prevent more Russian troops from arriving on Ukrainian soil. However, the Ukrainian government did not take responsibility for these attacks as in the past attacks. The Kremlin government, on the other hand, does not want to talk too much about these attacks for fear of damaging its reputation. The Kremlin government and the Russian army are on the alert for cross-border attacks by Ukrainian forces. Although the Russian army is very careful, the Ukrainian forces carry out their cross-border attacks easily. The events that took place within the borders of the Russian Federation the other day revealed the concern of the Russian army. The plane, which was circulating in the skies of Russia and whose identity could not be determined by the Russian army, caused the airspace to be closed in a large area, about 200 square kilometers of airspace over Pulkovo Airport, and the Leningrad region were closed due to the discovery of an unidentified air, posing a threat to civil aviation. In the face of this unidentified threat, the Russian Air Force urgently took off in fighter jets due to an unidentified aircraft. 200 square kilometers or 124 miles of airspace over St. Petersburg and the Leningrad region was closed. Russian warplanes took off to determine the type of threat coming from the direction of the Gulf of Finland. Russian authorities used the carpet plan in this. In Russia, such measures are usually taken after the illegal crossing of air borders is detected or when unidentified objects are registered in their airspace. This signals that all aircraft must land or leave the danger zone immediately. Planes of Russian airlines were ordered to divert to other airports. There is no data on what kind of threat the Russian authorities are facing. Some data indicate that this threat is unmanned aerial vehicles, while others state that it is balloon. The airspace over St. Petersburg remained closed until 13:00 hours. Flights shown on flight information display screens and PCU is shown with a delay. It was not clear whether the major threat in Russian skies was a threat to object on the ground, But after the attack on objects in the Krasnodar territory, the situation became very alarming. It may be linked to an alleged nighttime drone attack on Rosneft oil depot in Krasnodar near Russia's border with. Explosions were heard in the city of Tula in the Krasnodar region last night. Local residents noted that the USP was attacked by drones. The fires at the Rosk refinery did not create a major blast wave, but two very effective major explosions did occur. In addition to this incident, the alarm level is high in the Belgorod region, which is an important city that supports the war. Ukrainian forces conducted a massive drone strike on the Belgorod region. This incident occurred on the same day as the closure of St. Petersburg airspace. The remains of the three drones were found in the eastern Russian city of Belgorod, about 42 miles north of the Ukrainian border. Belgorod Mayor Valenty Dito stated that there were no injuries. After the drones crashed into the city, which is the administrative center of the region, Russian security services have launched an investigation into the remains. The drone was found on the streets and slightly damaged several vehicles. It is not known exactly where the unmanned aerial vehicles are at. The Russian President Vladimir Putin stressed that his government should support the city of Gerard because of the Ukrainian bombardment. The drones used in the attack in the Gerard region and most likely converted versions from reconnaissance drones to kamikaze drones. While the drone attack by Ukrainian forces in the Gerard region was within reason, the drone attack on 2AE seriously confused than the attack on Belgorod is more understandable because the distance between Belgorod and the Ukrainian border is only 40 kilo. Technically, the Ukrainian armed forces has offensive vehicles capable of inflicting damage to this depth in the Tuapse region. The situation is somewhat different than in Belgorod. The distance between the nearest front line where the Ukrainian forces are located and 2AE is at least 450 kilometers. The fact that the city is located on the Black Sea coast has caused the distance covered by the unmanned aerial vehicles to be longer. Given the distance, we can see that the Ukrainian forces add a new dimension to their cross-border. Besides long-range cross-border attacks, Ukrainian forces need larger-scale cross-border strikes to win the war. Former Russian diplomat Boris Bonder, who made a name for himself with his action with the beginning of the war, made important statements about the attack that the Ukrainian forces needed to win the war. We would like to remind you that Bonder announced that he resigned from diplomacy with great sadness after Vladimir Putin started his plan to invade Ukraine. This move by Bondarev was applauded by Western societies. Irev pointed out that in order to win the war, Ukraine had to hit important targets within the territory of Russia. Bondarev stated that if Ukrainian forces are unable to seriously damage targets in Russia, Russian forces will continue to flock to Ukraine. During the winter months, Russian forces carried out attacks targeting many civilian and energy infrastructures in Ukraine. But according to Bondi, Ukrainian forces, unlike the Russians, should not target civilian infrastructure, but military installations, military bases, such as airbase, missile bases, missile launches, and warehouses. Irev characterizes these targets as legitimate targets. All Ukrainian officials, especially the President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, emphasized that warplanes should be included in the existing aid packages in order to win the war. One of the Ukrainian officials who made this emphasis is Anton Garko, the advisor to the Ukrainian Interior. Anton Garko, advisor to Ukraine's Interior Minister, stated that Ukraine needs hundreds of thousands of warplanes to help it in its tough fight against Russia. Garko pointed out that the most important weapon in the war that took place on the territory of Ukraine is unmanned aerial vehicles. He also described drones as super weapons. Garko pointed out that the tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of warplanes that will be transferred to the Ukrainian Air Force will help Ukraine win the war more quickly. With the inclusion of warplanes in the aid packages of Western countries, the number of casualties of the Russian forces will increase significantly. The number of casualties of Ukrainian forces will decrease at the same rate in the last 2-month period. Russian forces have suffered 1/3 of the number of casualties since the beginning of the war. The serious increase in the number of casualties of the Russian forces indicates both the severity of the attacks by the Ukrainian forces and the depletion of the Russian forces.